Moving into a new home should have been a dream come true, but I never expected that my peaceful life would be turned into a living nightmare by a woman I would later come to know as Karen, the tyrannical HOA president who ruled the neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom. When I first arrived at my newly purchased home, I felt a sense of accomplishment and excitement. The house was everything I had ever wanted: a spacious layout, a beautiful yard, and most importantly, a place where I could finally have a dog of my own without worry. For years, I had lived in apartments with strict no-pet policies, so when I finally had the chance to adopt my golden retriever, Buddy, I didn't hesitate. He was my loyal companion, my best friend, and an essential part of my life. I had reviewed the HOA rules before moving in, making sure there was nothing preventing me from having a dog. The guidelines mentioned that residents had to clean up after their pets, keep them on leashes while outside, and ensure they weren't a nuisance. Fair enough. Nowhere did it state that dogs were outright banned. So, as I settled into my new home, I assumed everything would be fine. That was until the day I met Karen. She was a middle-aged woman with an unmistakable air of superiority, her sharp eyes constantly scanning for rule breakers, her lips perpetually pursed in disapproval. I first encountered her while taking Buddy out for a walk in the neighborhood. She stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes narrowing at my dog like he was some kind of wild beast. "Excuse me," she called out, marching toward me with the confidence of someone who believed she owned the very ground she walked on. "That dog isn't allowed here." Confused, I stopped walking. "Excuse me?" I asked, thinking I must have misheard her. "Dogs aren't permitted in this community," she said, crossing her arms. "It's against HOA policy." My stomach sank, but I quickly reminded myself that I had read the guidelines multiple times. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice calm, "the HOA rules don't say anything about banning dogs. They just state that owners have to keep them under control and clean up after them." Her face darkened. "I am the HOA president," she snapped, "and I enforce the rules. If I say dogs aren't allowed, they're not allowed." I felt my temper flare, but I forced myself to remain composed. "I'm sorry, but I don't think that's how HOA rules work," I replied. "The official guidelines don't say anything about banning dogs, and I made sure to check before moving in." Her lips curled into a condescending smile. "Then I suppose you didn't check hard enough," she sneered. "You'll be hearing from the HOA soon enough." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there, utterly baffled. A few days later, I received my first HOA violation notice, an official-looking letter in my mailbox, stamped with the HOA emblem. It stated that I was in violation of community regulations for keeping an unauthorized pet on the premises. Attached was a fine of $250. My heart pounded in frustration as I read the letter. This had to be a mistake. Surely, there was some kind of misunderstanding. I immediately reached out to the HOA office, hoping to clear things up. The response I received only added fuel to the fire. "The fine stands." The email read curtly, "All pets must be individually approved by the HOA board, and yours was not." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Nowhere in the HOA documents did it say anything about needing board approval for pets. This was clearly Karen's doing. I decided to fight back. I compiled my HOA documents, highlighted the sections that proved my dog was allowed, and sent a formal appeal to the HOA. Days passed with no response. Then, another fine arrived. This time, the amount had doubled to $500, with an added warning that further noncompliance would result in legal action. My frustration turned to anger. I wasn't going to let this woman bully me out of my own home. But I had no idea just how far Karen was willing to go to make my life miserable. I wasn't going to roll over and accept these ridiculous fines, so I took the next step. I formally requested a meeting with the HOA board to dispute the charges. Surely, once I presented my case and pointed out the actual rules, the issue would be resolved. But I underestimated Karen's level of control over the HOA. The meeting was scheduled for a week later, and in the meantime, I decided to talk to some of my neighbors to see if they had experienced anything similar. To my surprise, nearly everyone had a horror story about Karen. One couple told me she had fined them $100 for leaving their garage door open for more than 10 minutes. Another man claimed she issued a violation for improperly placed trash cans, despite following the scheduled pickup times. The more I listened, the clearer it became. Karen thrived on power trips, and I was just her latest target. The day of the meeting arrived, and I walked into the HOA office prepared with documents, emails, and even screenshots of the official HOA guidelines. I expected a fair discussion, but what I got instead was a complete sham. Karen sat at the head of the table, her arms crossed, smirking as if she already knew the outcome. The other board members, 3 older individuals who barely looked up from their papers, nodded along to everything she said. I presented my case, showing the rules in black and white, but Karen simply waved me off. "The board has reviewed your case," she said, "and we've decided that your pet is disruptive to the community." I frowned. Disruptive? Buddy hasn't caused a single problem. He doesn't bark excessively, he doesn't roam free, and I always clean up after him. "We've received multiple complaints," she said, sliding a folder toward me. "Your dog has been reported for excessive noise, aggressive behavior, and damage to community property." My jaw dropped. "That's a lie," I said, flipping through the so-called complaints. There were no names attached, just vague descriptions of alleged incidents with no proof. "I have video footage from my doorbell camera," I argued. "Buddy is either inside with me or on a leash at all times." Karen just smiled. "Well, the board has made its decision. You can either comply or face further consequences." I walked out of that meeting furious. Not only was Karen fabricating complaints, but the entire board was in on it. That same evening, I got another fine in my mailbox, this time for $1,000. This was personal now. Karen wasn't just enforcing some twisted interpretation of the rules. She was actively trying to make me either give up my dog or move out. I knew I had to fight back in a bigger way. The next day, I filed an official complaint with the state's HOA Regulatory Board. I compiled every email, every fine, and every piece of evidence I had showing that Karen was abusing her power. But while I waited for a response, Karen escalated her attacks. I started getting anonymous complaint letters about unpleasant odors coming from my property. Clearly another false accusation aimed at my dog. One morning, I even caught Karen snooping around my backyard, peeking over my fence. I confronted her, and she had the audacity to say she was inspecting for violations. "This is private property," I snapped. "You have no right to be back here." She just smirked. "You agreed to abide by HOA rules when you moved in. That doesn't mean you can trespass." She shrugged and walked away. Things got worse. The fines continued rolling in, now totaling over $5,000. Then came the threats of legal action. Karen sent a formal notice stating that if I didn't pay the outstanding fines, the HOA would place a lien on my home. I couldn't believe it. She was willing to go this far just to get rid of my dog. It was beyond petty. It was borderline harassment. But instead of backing down, I fought harder. I started speaking with other homeowners, gathering signatures for a petition to remove Karen from her position. It turns out I wasn't the only one tired of her nonsense. Several neighbors, once too afraid to speak up, shared their own frustrations. Together, we began building a case against her. That's when Karen made her biggest mistake. One night, my security cameras caught her doing something unthinkable. She was throwing trash over my fence, clearly trying to manufacture another bogus complaint against me. That was the final straw. I compiled the footage, the fake complaints, the trespassing incidents, and every violation she had issued against me and my neighbors. It was time to take her down once and for all. Armed with overwhelming evidence of Karen's corruption, I was ready to take the fight to the next level. It wasn't just about my dog anymore. It was about exposing her abuse of power and putting an end to her reign of terror over the neighborhood. I filed an official report with the local housing authority and included all the proof I had gathered, from the fake complaints to the security footage of her trespassing and throwing trash into my yard. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, and after reviewing my case, he assured me that I had more than enough grounds to take legal action. With my lawyer's help, I drafted a cease and desist letter, demanding that Karen and the HOA stop issuing fraudulent fines and rescind the ones they had already placed against me. The letter also warned that if they continued their harassment, I would sue both Karen and the HOA board for defamation, harassment, and illegal enforcement of non-existent rules. The moment she received the letter, I knew she was rattled. That same day, she sent out a community-wide email claiming that certain residents were trying to undermine the integrity of the HOA and that she would not tolerate disrespect toward the board. It was clear that she was trying to turn the neighborhood against me, but her plan backfired spectacularly. By this point, the petition to remove Karen had gained serious traction. More and more neighbors came forward with their own horror stories, and it turned out that Karen had been extorting residents for years, demanding arbitrary fines, threatening legal action over minor infractions, and even manipulating HOA funds for her own benefit. The final nail in her coffin came when one resident, an elderly woman who had been fined thousands for unauthorized lawn decorations, revealed that Karen had been pocketing a portion of the HOA fees for herself. That revelation spread like wildfire, and suddenly, the entire community was demanding answers. The HOA was forced to hold an emergency meeting, and this time, Karen couldn't manipulate the outcome. Dozens of residents showed up, many bringing their own documentation of Karen's abuse. My lawyer attended as well, presenting my case in front of everyone. When he played the security footage of Karen trespassing on my property and throwing garbage over my fence, gasps filled the room. The board members, who had once nodded along to everything Karen said, now looked visibly uncomfortable. For the first time, Karen wasn't in control. She tried to defend herself, claiming that the footage had been taken out of context and that she was only performing her duties as HOA president, but no one was buying it. My lawyer pointed out that her actions were not only unethical, but illegal. The evidence here is enough for a lawsuit, he stated firmly. And I assure you, we are prepared to move forward if these fraudulent fines and harassing actions do not stop immediately. At that moment, Karen realized she had lost. She sat there, her face red with frustration as the HOA board, now desperate to distance themselves from her, voted unanimously to strip her of her position. A full audit of the HOA's finances was ordered, and when the results came back, it confirmed what many had suspected. Karen had been embezzling money from the community. She was promptly removed from the HOA entirely, hit with legal charges, and forced to pay back thousands of dollars in stolen funds. With Karen gone, the fraudulent fines against me were officially rescinded, and the new HOA leadership even issued a formal apology. My neighbors, once fearful of speaking out, were finally able to breathe easy. The entire atmosphere of the community changed overnight. People began chatting more freely, tensions eased, and for the first time since moving in, I truly felt at home. As for Buddy, he never had to leave my side. He continued living happily in our home, free from the threat of unjust fines and harassment. Whenever I took him on walks through the neighborhood, people would stop to pet him, no longer afraid of Karen lurking around every corner. In the end, justice prevailed. Karen had tried to use her power to intimidate and control, but she had underestimated one thing. When you push people too far, they will fight back. And when they do, no amount of manufactured complaints, bogus fines, or empty threats can protect a tyrant from the consequences of their own actions.